Good morning. Yeah, Rick, I was going to share some of the same stories, man. I think, that relationship for me anyways started to blossom because I was in the middle of transitioning away from football. And football has been my life since I was 6 years old. So, trying to figure out what comes next and finding clarity and purpose in the same way, that I felt that sort of conviction with football was difficult. And I've been mentored by coaches, parents, bosses all my life. And Rick, I appreciate your mentorship for sure. I really respect this program. I was talking to Warren this morning of the Origin out in Seattle, and it's pretty cool what the Lord's doing with each chapter. And I just recently learned that it started here in the fall of 2025. So, I'm excited to be a part of this beginning. And Frederick, you're proof that your father's a pretty good father too, because you were preaching up here, man. I appreciate it. Guys, I put together a presentation mainly just to keep me on track. I don't want to give a lecture. This is more of a speaking from a heart, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you for coming. And I just hope that if one thing resonates, we got a little better today, and that's my goal. So Warren, Rick, Carl, thank you for inviting me to be a part. So before we jump in, let me just give you a brief little background on me. So I'm from the state of Georgia, about 40 minutes north of Atlanta, in a place called Rabun County. And then I moved, my dad was my high school football coach. We moved to Flowery Branch, which is there in Hawk County, right next to Gwinnett County, if you're familiar with Georgia. Right there in Bulldog country, put it that way. And I grew up a huge Florida Gators fan because of Steve Spurrier. So pretty cool how life comes in full circle moments like that, when he came to knock on my dad's door in high school and come to offer, some little redneck kid from North Georgia to go play for him. So pretty special. Man, I grew up in a locker room. My dad was my football coach. My mother was a basketball coach. My older brother, Jared Shaw, played at Georgia Southern as a quarterback. My little sister played tennis in college. So as you can imagine, pretty competitive household. And I think a lot of the founding principles and attributes that help you in life come from being a part of a team and being a part of something bigger than yourself. And I was very fortunate to watch my mom and my dad deliver messages to their locker rooms. And that's the way that they parented us. And so every lesson, every principle wasn't directed to one individual. It was directed to a team, to a unit. And you talked about earlier, creating a healthy locker room. Man, it's got that vibe in here. When you come in here and it's loud and people are laughing and chatting and being real with each other, that's special. Special things happen. And one of my favorite books, speaking of books we talk about, is a book called Tribe by Sebastian Unger. And I would encourage everyone to pick that up, especially with what you're trying to create here. So on purpose, I think everybody knows who this is. Not that ugly bald dude on the left, but the guy cutting the net. One of the GOATs, Coach K, and he's got my favorite culture quote. If I can there we go. Culture lives or dies in the hands of everyone every day. Now, we've got some impressive leaders in here, so I'm not saying anything to you that you don't already know, but I'm fascinated with the ecosystem of leadership, culture, people at the center of it. Always have. And being a son of a coach, I've always really admired and followed closely some of the coaches that have done this the greatest and sustained it for a long period of time. It's hard to motivate people, with different backgrounds and different experiences, different reasons for what they do, and make them become connected and real with each other, like in this room. Coach K was certainly one of those guys. Now, as we look at this little pyramid here, I've been a part of really good teams, and I've been a part of really bad teams. We talked about South Carolina. From 2010 to 2013, I think we won 44 games in 4 years. Pretty good. Beat that team in the upstate 5 years in a row, 3 consecutive 11-win seasons. A special era for Gamecock history, right? We go on, and I fulfilled a childhood dream to play in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns and Chicago Bears. We won 17 games in 4 years, and keep in mind, those are 17-game schedules. Not very good. But if I go back and look, why we were good at Carolina, why we were not so good in Cleveland and Chicago, it had little to do with talent. And you all know that we had loads of talent in that locker room in Columbia, South Carolina. But we had loads of talent in that locker room in Cleveland and Chicago. When you're in the NFL, it's nothing but talent, And so your culture and your character and who you bring in the building matters a little bit more when everyone's talented. And I always like to say that we won more games before stepping foot on that football field in college because of who we were in that locker room. And in my opinion, it all starts with shared values. Now, a locker room, workforce, very similar, where you got different people. Man, that's great. You got to be different. Personalities, like I said, different background, experiences, what has shaped you in life. But I think the non-negotiable is the shared value. And here's why I think that. Because shared values breed the chemistry. It breeds the connection. It breeds the camaraderie. You know, there is a standard in place that you just kind of have. And it's hard to move forward when you have differing values. And then when you have shared values and you have that chemistry, from my experience, man, the locker room, it starts to influence behavior. We start rowing together. You know, there are certain daily disciplines and that player-led culture that you get when you have shared values, which influences behavior. And then, you know, any leader in this room, you can relate to what I'm talking about. It's pretty. You can quickly diagnose if your culture aligns, if your people align. And oftentimes when it doesn't, it's either, you know, lack of clarity, responsibility, lack of goal, or lack of shared value. And so, you know, I was on staff at Carolina with Will Muschamp and Shane Beamer, okay? And I lived a little bit from the beginning of the transfer portal. Now, the transfer portal in business has always been that way, right? But I think from the hiring part, or bringing kids, recruiting part, man, if you don't do your research on character and who that person is, and if you align with a shared value, man, you can't just plug and play a talent. You know, that only takes you so far. I've been a part of those teams where it just gets selfish, you know. And the reason why we were not so good those 4 years is what you see down here. The downfall of most teams isn't the lack of talent, vision, or ambition. You know, every year, head coach would come up in a team meeting, and we'd go over, all right, men, here's our mission, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to get there, here's our daily disciplines, here's the practice schedule, our routine, this is how we're going to win games, right? This is how we're going to hold up the Vince Lombardi Trophy. You know, this is how we're going to win a national championship. Now, that was all the same. So the ambition, the vision, everybody wants to win. But it's the mistaken belief that culture is someone else's job. You know, because when you're thinking about 120 players in a locker room or X amount of players in your workforce, whatever that may be, it's very easy to sit back and say, man, one person is not going to influence the entire direction of a team. One person is not going to influence our culture, right? Well, when you have that one person in that room, guess what? That's a little contagious. Then you got 2, 3, 4, and 5 people that adopt that sort of, and it may not even be selfish. It might just be you just kind of put yourself on an island and I'm going to go get mine. You know, for all the things I loved in college, I hated about the NFL because it was a little bit more of, I'm going to go get mine in NFL. And in college, you know, you're coming in with the brotherhood and you suffer together. And I think that's important. You got to suffer together and you find success together. Then it means a little bit more. You know, your brother right beside you means a little bit more. And it just wasn't quite that same, at least with the organizations that I was a part of in the NFL. But Coach K's point, culture lives or dies in the hands of everyone every day. When we think of leadership, you know, or culture, you think of top down. And I think it starts there for sure. Vision, belief, who you go get in your building. But what Coach K is saying is lived out bottom up, you know, and it's certainly not built in the big moments of the trophy that you get at the end of the season or the accolades for your company. That's not where the culture is defined, you know. It's defined really in the casual conversation in the hallway, the genuine life check-in, breakfasts like this, you know, that's where it's lived out bottom up. And I've always been fascinated with it. And Coach K is one of the best to do it. Speaking of another coach, I'll start with my dad. So I've already mentioned son of a coach. He bounced around a little bit when I was a kid in the state of Georgia, but he had a marble cube on his desk. And it was always fascinating to me, and it was always on his desk everywhere he's been. He's still coaching in South Georgia. Guarantee you he's got this marble cube on his desk. And on each side of this cube, there were coaching quotes. And there was 2 that I were raised on and that he still preaches to his teams. And this is the first one. Anybody knows who that is being lifted up in that picture? Yeah, that's Vince Lombardi. The quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field of endeavor. And that's hard to grasp that as a 6-year-old. I was like, man, what is he saying? I couldn't, pronounce some of those words. But boy, as I've gotten older, that hits a little bit different. I think all of us can tend to attach ourselves to what we do, and that sort of define our quality of life. And that's just not the case. He's saying the commitment to excellence, that's a life thing. I think of truly your daily disciplines. What do you put in your body? How do you move your body? The words that you speak, your body language, like what are your habits? This is a habit quote right here. And we can't really, I say we, man, I'm just disguising this in I, because these are things that I have to remind myself of. But we're all in this together this morning, right? You can't compartmentalize who we are at home to who we are at work, to who we are on a golf course, to who we are the next day. The roller coaster, that's not what this is about. What are those daily disciplines? And there's a reason why, it's hard to become the man that you want to be, because it requires an extreme level of discipline, And what do your habits look like? And Vince Lombardi, he nail on the head. People shape culture, and every action communicates, what we value. And I really think body language, it starts there. My dad was huge on this. And I think it's an underestimated attribute in everybody. Or what does our body language scream? All right, rest in peace, Coach Lou Holtz. I had to throw this one in here. And truth be told, you're laughing for the same reason I laughed when I was 5-year-old, because it didn't say darn ship. It said something else. So my dad, hard-nosed, old-school coach. And, he got it out of the mud when he was a kid. He was raised hard, and really appreciate the way that he raised me. But don't tell me how rocky the sea is, just bring the darn ship in. But I want to pause there, because here's what Lou Holtz is not saying, and this is not the lesson. It's not saying that, bottle up your frustrations until you explode, or suppress emotions until it comes to a head. That's not what this is about. That can get you in real trouble. Been there. But what he is saying is, don't let your frustrations become excuses. And even worse than that, don't give permission to your teammate to have those same excuses, because that's a contagion. It becomes poisonous, That's one thing we can't control. We've all been around that person. I've been around people. Sometimes maybe I've been that person, where you just find the negativity in everything. And whether you know it or not, you're around that person long enough, man, it brings you down, right? You start to see that in yourself is contagious. And then on the flip side, we've all been around that person that's just the optimist, that sees every challenge and likes to problem solve and elevates the room and elevates the people around them. That's also contagious. That's what's cool about it. And that's our choice, right? That's our choice. Who knows Carol Lawson? Have y'all heard that name before? The women's Duke basketball coach. And she said something recently in a post-game press conference that was real, man. And I think it fits well. I think the way that she articulated this lesson, I loved. Lock into what is real and true. So Carol Lawson comes to the podium and she says, navigating from a season of adversity to a season of prosperity, the frustrating part of that is you never know how long, or you can't control how long you're in that season of adversity, but you can control who you are in that season. And then she goes further and says, what you have to do in those times is lock into what is real and true. In basketball, what is real and true are analytics, is film, and it's what I see from my team every single day. That's what's real and true. And that allows us, her team, to give a real assessment of where we are. And like when I'm in a season of adversity, that's pretty good. Anything outside of that is noise. It doesn't serve us, right? It does nothing for us. And so sometimes when I'm on the go and I'm getting overwhelmed and I'm like, golly, man, how am I going to get to the next time without neglecting everything that's important to me? Man, I got to press pause. What's real and true? Do my habits align with who I say I am? Do my habits, choices, words, the books I read, the podcasts I listen to, the information I consume, does that align with who I want to be? That gives me what is real and true and a real assessment of what's going on in my life and where I need to call an audible. It's being real with each other. And some of the hardest things, we can do is look ourselves in the mirror and be real, right? But I think that's important. That's what Coach Kara Lawson and what Coach Lou Holtz is talking about. All right, I'm going to get into more personal testimony here. So everybody knows who that picture is, and I got a little PTSD looking at that. So I'm not going to stare at it too long. Coach Steve Spurrier, HBC, maybe one of a handful of people I'd really take a bullet for. Not when I was playing for him, but now. And I got to say, man, it's really tough to see your heroes get old. It's tough seeing him come to Columbia and hole up in the Oyster Bar downtown in Vista and have a couple of banquet course beers and reminisce. But forever grateful for how he invests in the people on his teams long after you hang up a helmet. All right, now that I said the good stuff about Coach, this is 2012 against Tennessee. This is warranted. I took like a 6-yard sack on third down. We had to punt. But this lesson is be coachable. So 2011, my sophomore year. If y'all can remember the game against Kentucky at home, that was my first start at home. Had a really good game. That was like my coming out party. Alshon Jeffrey went off. As a young quarterback, you just find your go-to number one and get him the ball. And then we go on the road to Starkville, Mississippi, and have to go 90 yards to win the game. And then we go to Knoxville, play Tennessee, have to go 90 yards to win a game. But we won. Coach Spurrier, we had a bye week the next week. Coach Spurrier pulls me in his office right after he turned off the golf channel probably. He's like, Connor, sit down. And he's got this clip of about 25 plays. And I didn't know what I was in store for. Like, I sit down. Honestly, as a young kid, 3-0 as a starter, I didn't play great against Mississippi State and Tennessee. Not good at all. But we won. And he's saying, all right, Connor, I'm never going to coach your strengths out of you. But if you don't start spending the time to develop in the areas where you need to develop, you're not only putting limitations on yourself, but you're holding us back. You're holding your team back. And I'm sitting here thinking like, dang, Coach, we just won the last 30 games. But then he starts playing the clips. And I'm sinking in my chair because, my strengths were my default. And that's mobile quarterback, right? If I get penetration up front, I'm looking for lanes to run. I'm extending plays. And I get away with it enough where it's a strength and my default. But he's pausing the clip, and I got guys screaming wide open. That 10-yard run or that 4-yard run, it could have been a 15-yard explosive gain or a touchdown. And he's saying, look, if you don't learn coverage, if you don't learn protection schemes, if you don't learn how to become a poised passer and a developed, polished quarterback, I'm gonna sit you down. And I did get benched a couple times by Coach Spurrier. But I think his point was, man, it's hard to learn lessons when you win. Man, I think you gotta fail a little bit. And he was really being intentional with me, like, although we won, you're a lot better than this. And I bring this up to say this too. I think you need to have people, mentors, whoever that is, to see the potential in us. Like, I am the benefactor of someone believing in me so much that I start to believe in myself in areas where I'm not very confident, to speak life in me. We all need that. I think it's also a point of, it's okay to have tough conversations with people, be honest with them. And if they respond in a way that's defensive and can't be coachable, probably don't want those cats around you, But I'm not saying that I responded immediately in a positive way to Coach Spurrier in that office, but walking back to my truck, he's right, and the truth hurts sometimes, but I'm thankful for the truth. And I think it's a good reminder that, man, have honest conversations with people. And also, Ego is the Enemy. Awesome book. Author is Ryan Holiday. And if you needed some help looking in the mirror to be real with yourself, go pick up that book, because that'll do it. Find a teammate. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, gentlemen, because this is just objective truth in life. Joy is contagious. So that's Bruce Ellington, Contagious Smile. If y'all know Bruce, man, it's hard not to be happy around that dude. But Craig Fitzgerald was our strength coach. I believe he came in 2009. I was a freshman in 2010. And our culture shifted around Craig Fitzgerald. Obviously, just got after it in the weight room and weeded out some of the people that shouldn't be there and high levels of standards, and everything was competition-based. But this was what I'll forever remember from Coach Fitz. Find a teammate echoes in my mind all the time, because he would scream it in the weight room, he'd scream it on the practice field, he'd scream it during games, and it was positive reinforcements. I'll give you an example. On Sundays, we'd come together as a team and watch the film from the day before. We'd watch it as a team, we'd watch it as a unit, offense, defense, and then position units. When we watched it as a team, we would have highlights and lowlights. Highlights, of course, being 5-6 plays that reinforced our values: relentless, toughness, effort, those type of things, teammate. And then we'd have lowlights, and those would reflect, making an example of someone being selfish, the opposite of our team values, right? So what happens when you watch TV and someone scores? Oftentimes it's looking up at the stands and it's look at me, I'm doing a dance and all that. Well, Coach Fitz was just like finding those waiting for those opportunities to clip it on a low light on Sundays. And he would freeze frame it, touchdown pass, touchdown run from whoever. And he would pause it and be like, man, if you turned around, you would see 10 other guys screaming down the field trying to celebrate with you who helped get your butt in the end zone. You know what I mean? And so that lesson, find a teammate. Here's the reality, dude, it's hard to win. And whatever winning looks like for you all in this room, I know it's hard. That's why it's worth chasing. It's hard becoming the man you want to be and putting together habits when it gets hard to keep the discipline to do those habits, right? It's hard to look yourself in the mirror, man. It's hard. My dad always said it's the heart that makes it good, and he's got Parkinson's now, and every time he leaves my house, dang, man, I wasn't expecting this. He would turn around and say, it's the heart that makes it good, coming from someone who's going through it, But winning should never become like just another thing. And the way to combat that, I think, is to celebrate with a teammate, celebrate with a spouse, the small wins. If you're anything like me, I'm a little bit type A. I'm sometimes overachiever and, competitive. I have a high level expectation, my own worst critic, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a double-edged sword. Obviously, one side, it's a driving factor, motivating. A lot of successful people in life are that way. But there is a anchor to that. The other side, are you ever content? No. And the Bible calls us to be content. You can't experience the fruit of the Spirit without being content. You can't be grateful. I can't be grateful for what I have in my life if I'm not content. And there's a big difference between being complacent and being content. Definitely not called to be complacent, right? Everyone has gifts and skills bestowed on us, but we have to be good stewards, to that. But I like to experience the fruit of the Spirit. I like to enjoy this life that I've been given, And so sometimes you got to press the pause button in order to be grateful and have the attitude of gratitude. That's the best way to do it. Go celebrate with a teammate, because joy is contagious. All right. You replace ball with anything other than Jesus Christ, guess what? Gonna be a bad guy. So this is 2016 in Chicago. Third preseason game, we're playing the Kansas City Chiefs at Soldier Field. I'm playing the best ball of my career leading up to this moment. We go to Foxborough, throw a couple of touchdowns. I'm battling for the number 2 position behind Jay Cutler that year and feel pretty good about it. And this was a third drive. I go in late in the third quarter. We march down, score, get the ball back, march down, score, get the ball back, about midfield, 4th and 10. And, life kind of slows down for me at this moment. And if you let me nerd out a little bit, I'm just going to say the play call. and walk you through it. So we got dice right, 64 wide Gotti spin. We got any football coaches in here? Any former football players? So dice right, 2-by-2 formation. Got 2 receivers over here, 2 receivers over here. I'm the quarterback. 64 is our protection. My running back's right beside me. 64 is telling what the offensive lineman to do. Wide Gotti spin. So Gotti is a go route and an option route. Y is on the option route. Wide Gotti spin. Over here, we got a crossing route. And then we've got a deep in cut called a dagger route. So I'm praying for man coverage. 4th and 10, we got to convert. We're losing. And I confirm man coverage. I've got outside leverage on my option route, so it's dead. But I got to put my eyes over here to move this linebacker out of the window for my crossing route to come in the picture. You with me? And the nickel defensive player is on outside leverage of the player running the cross. So naturally, he's going to win. So my job is to move that linebacker out of the way. So Y20 say hot. My eyes over here, move the linebacker, fit it in the window, catches the crossing route, first down. Got to share that because that's the best part of the story here. So thank you for indulging me on the details. Now, my left leg was stuck in the ground, and they had a twist up front. Nose tackle came through, and it felt like he weighed 2,000 pounds, but probably close to 320. And I got hit awkwardly, was pulled down by my shoulder pads this way with my left leg locked, and I heard a loud pop. And I've had teammates before that have torn ACLs, and the way they explain it is it sounds like an internal gunshot, and that's exactly what this felt like. So immediately I'm like, shoot, man, I just tore my ACL. And when Buddy finally got off of me, I'm checking my knee, and it seemed all good, and then midway from my shin down was just displaced, off, facing that way. And of course, man, that hurt. But 10 seconds later, it really hurt worse to realize that's probably my last snap. That was my 3rd year in the NFL, lots of goals, lots of dreams. It's what I've done forever. And that was the first time where those football goggles were stripped off my face. And I got to figure out who the heck I am. And see, I would be invited to speak at FCAs and churches and college and in the off season in the NFL. And I would naively say, that football is something that I do. It's not who I am. That's never really been challenged, until then, when I started to figure out if I'm not a football player, man, do I like God the same? Do I like him the same? Does he like me the same? Do people like me the same? Those are real questions. Now, I mentioned going back to my pops. Old school, hard-nosed coach, right? His definition of mental toughness, mental fortitude is head down, you just grind it out, right? And there's a level of significance there where I think that's important. You got to be resilient, but also you can put yourself on an island. And that was what I was doing in that moment. But I put my head down. I was like, okay, what can I do? I'm going to attack my rehab. This is an 18-month rehab process that I've got to cut in half because I'm fighting for a roster spot. So after the season in January, OTAs happen in early April, organized training activities. And I don't have a choice, guys. Like undrafted bubble player, had my moment to fight for a backup job, but now got this injury on my resume, pretty significant injury. Like I got to go prove that I can still play. And so I report back in April in Chicago. Fortunately, signed a year extension on my contract after that injury. And after, about a week and a half of practices, obvious I'm not the same player. But I don't think that was the biggest concern for me. I think it was the realization that I wasn't the same person with so many great things going on in my life, 2 beautiful kids, healthy family, awesome wife. All I can think about is this performance-based identity that I have. And so let me back up. In August, right before training camp, so before any preseason games, John Fox was our head coach. He addresses our team, and he introduces this person called Gloria Beleg. And Gloria is a sports psychologist for Team USA Olympics. And she worked with the Chicago Bears for a number of years. And this was our first year with Chicago. John Fox brings Gloria up on stage, introduces her. Hey, guys, she's a resource. She's a teammate. Use her. And in my mind, I'm like, that's cool that we have that. I'm sure 31 other teams have the same thing. It's a check a box, mental health type of stuff. That was what my thought process was at that time. Like, that's cool. Keep your distance. I'm good. We'll never need you. Obviously pretty aggressive about it. Then this happens 3 weeks later. Head down, rehab process. Now go back to April. After that week and a half, I'm starting to realize, like, man, I'm not who I want to be at home. I'm not who I want to be in the locker room. I don't really know what's next. Playing the what-if game. Is this it for me? And I went and sat in Gloria's office. First time introducing myself. And it felt like 2 minutes, but it was probably like 8 seconds of silence until she broke that silence and we started talking. She asked if I was a believer. And I won't go into all those conversations, to be honest, but the biggest thing I learned is there was such a rooted performance-based identity that I had where even winning to me was a relief. It's not even something I could enjoy because I was too busy looking at the next thing that I had to do great, And so it started to not only rip these football goggles off, but there was something to the core of that, And, I'm not blaming my parents either, but when you're raised as an athlete, always expected to go compete, perform, and win, boy, it's easy to get a performance-based mindset, And even if you don't compete in sports, and you're a type A trying to achieve anything and have lofty goals and very ambitious, pretty darn easy to get ambitious, performance-based mindset, right? And that was a revelation for me. Like, God, you're right, because every Saturday game in Columbia when we won, it was like, phew, now let's go do it again next Saturday, phew, And I love winning, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't feel like a burden, After all, the GM of the Cleveland Browns said to me, this is a child's game for a king's ransom. And just like you said, Fred, like Jesus wants us to be a boy, like we got to have that spirit no matter what we do to go chase it like a boy would at a playground when you're playing backyard football. That's when it's pure. Keep the pureness. Keep that boy spirit. Who you are is more important than what we do. All right, am I okay on time? 2 more slides. Move the chains. All right, who can remember this game without me giving any clues? Who are we playing? Mizzou, yep. So this is 2013. Obviously a huge pivotal game in Gamecock history, and we're on the road. But to share this story, we got to back up a week, unfortunately. So we're at Knoxville playing Tennessee. On paper, not a very good Tennessee team, but we find a way to lose it. Dang it. It's the one that keeps me up at night still because eventually it kept us out of the SEC championship game that year, But sometimes you got to lose to learn some lessons, right? Sometimes you got to have a wake-up call. And we go to Columbia, Missouri the next week, undefeated team, really good defensive front. That's a good football team. And it's a 7 o'clock kick. And I have a partially tore LCL against Tennessee, the second to last drive. And so I sparingly practiced the next week. But we get to Friday, and we get on a plane to Columbia, Missouri, and I get the flu. And I'm throwing up on the plane. If you ever met Coach Spurrier, that dude is the biggest germaphobe you'll ever meet. I promise you, if I had a parachute on that plane, he'd have kicked my butt off of it. But we land, and I get isolated. I'm not going to any of the team or position meetings. I'm getting IVs from Clint Haggard and Rachel Sharp, our trainers, athletic trainers. And all day Saturday, I'm just resting, recovery, isolated, quarantined. Well, we finally get to the stadium, probably about 5 o'clock, 2 hours before kick, and Coach Spurrier comes up to me and it's like, hey, obviously you're not playing, Dylan's going. And he says, don't worry about dressing, because I'm sick. And I was voted as a team captain in 2013 by my teammates. So it was important for me to go do the coin toss at least. So I'm in full uniform, we go do the coin toss. And it was just an awkward game. A couple of turnovers in the red zone, just couldn't find a spark. Gave up some explosive plays on defense. So we find ourselves in the hole, 17-0 at the end of the third quarter, about 2 minutes left. And I'm staying close to Coach Spurrier because he's signaling in the plays, and I like to be locked in and know what's going on. But I saw this coming. And, just like that picture y'all saw, the famous script toss, what felt like it went 30 yards on the field. We had a quick 3 and out. He turned around, eye contact, felt like he was looking into my soul for like 2 minutes. And he was like, Connor, can you go? And I was just like, quick look at the scoreboard. It's like, yes, sir, I can go. He's like, okay, we got to make a move now. Here's why I bring up this story. When you get in a zone, like your adrenaline's going, you don't remember much. I don't remember anything from this game. I remember every play from the coach's copy, watching film. I don't remember anything except for this moment right here. I remember jogging on the field, head down, backed up, saying, Connor, you can't win in one drive. Just move the chains, And that put a perspective in, was like, we're down 17-0. If we go score, it's still 17-7. You know what? If we go 3 and out, nothing changes. What do I have to lose? I have 4 opportunities to get 10 yards. And every opportunity, get the ball out of your hands and get it into your playmaker's hands. That's it. Trust what you see. Get the ball in your playmaker's hands. Get 10 yards. Guess what? Then you have another 4 opportunities to get 10 yards. And then before you know it, you're cross midfield. You look down, trust what you see, move on to the next play, you're in the red zone. You go score, 17-7. Go score again, 17-14. And 17-17, we go into overtime. They get the ball first, wide zone, score early. We get the ball. Coach Spurrier's pitching a fit because I just take 2 sacks. Now it's 4th and 15. And I'm, real quick note, so glad that we didn't have the mic in the helmet like they do nowadays. I just thought of that. Man, that'd be tough. I had to put that thing on mute or something. But we're 4th and 15, and game's probably over. And we have this concept we call it scissors, where it's a post in the corner. And I'm thinking they're in prevent. They got to be like on the goal line, not letting us in. We're like on the 35-yard line now after 2 sacks. Well, we run a post, and they have 2-man. So 2-man is you got man underneath, you got 2 safeties, and they're supposed to have their halves, right? Well, post route runs off his man, and he keeps that safety on the hash instead of in his half. He's right on the hash. And then Bruce gets off the line of scrimmage, captures outside leverage, runs a corner out. I'll loft it in the back of the end zone, catches it. We go into second overtime. Getting the ball out of your hands into your playmaker's hands. We had the ball first. I missed a wide open Rory Anderson on a shallow route. And so we have to settle for a field goal. And then they come in, and I think it's like 4th and 5, and they go for a field goal. What happens? Boink, off the upright, good guys win. And here's another reason why I share this story. I don't compete anymore. Still an athlete, can touch the rim. I can still go. I can still ball. But I don't compete anymore. But you know what? Life can still get overwhelming. Man, I've got 4 kids. We're those crazy people that homeschool. Man, I got responsibilities, like Georgia on Monday, Sumter on Tuesday. We're here on Thursday morning, Florence. Life can get going. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, shoot, just get 10 yards, man. Don't put your own self-limitations on top of you where you can't even see 10 yards right in front of you. It's a lot easier when you're sitting on a 10-yard line instead of looking at the opposing goal line. Look at the 20-yard line. We got 4 opportunities to get there. And you know what? This is a testament of this. We're not meant to walk this life alone. When I say get the ball out of your hands and into your playmaker's hands, aren't we designed to be thrive in fellowship? We all need teammates. We all need a tribe. We all need to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And that's what that night told me. One play at a time, compound interest, right? Just move the chains. Move the chains. Connor, that's all right. If you can't do it, I'll find someone who can. You're doing the best you can. All right, guys, I'm gonna get through this the best way I can. Everyone has a health story, whether that's a personal story or someone that they, a loved one. And that's true. I really do think that your health is the most important thing because it does impact everything that you love to do. And more importantly, it impacts everybody that you love and everybody who loves you. That's what health does. My story started about, next week it'll be 6 months ago, which is kind of wild to think about because sometimes it feels like last week and sometimes it feels like a fever dream, like it never happened. But 6 months ago, I'm coaching my son Decker's 8 and under flag football team at Gracely Park in Simpsonville, South Carolina. And September 17th, 2026 was a Wednesday night. And like any other Wednesday night, Decker's in the truck with me and we're listening to college football and NFL intro songs. And oh, by the way, in this league, an 8 and under league, coaches are quarterbacks. So I'm like, I'm playing, let's go. We're getting hyped up. And that's just our tradition, we're getting fired up. We're listening to Space Odyssey 2001, all the good stuff. Enter Sandman. So we get to the ballpark, and it's probably about 5 minutes into the game, second drive. I start feeling symptoms I can't place, like never felt before. My hearing started to fade. My vision started to blacken. I can remember breaking the huddle, getting to the line of scrimmage, calling a play. As soon as the ball left my hand, I was like, something's really wrong. And so I walked casually to our home sideline, still trying to figure out what's going on with me. And I remember telling one of our assistant coaches that, hey man, I don't feel good. Y'all gonna have to step in, hand in the playbook. And then I turned around and collapsed from sudden cardiac arrest. First time I ever heard that term. And my whole family was there. My wife, 9 months pregnant at the time, my 11-year-old daughter, obviously my 8-year-old son, and my 2-year-old son, who was probably burning the place down somewhere. But, fortunately for me, Jesus' hands were all over it because of where I had to be and more importantly, who had to be there. Because Caleb Carter and Zach Moore, dang. They were coaching their sons right next to me, on the field right next to me. All right, and Caleb Carter is a rescue lieutenant at Simpsonville Fire Department. You know what his job is? To teach his guys what to do when they first arrive on scene. Part of that is proper CPR training. If there is anybody on this earth that I wanted to do CPR on me, it would be Caleb Carter. And guess what? The cat was coaching his son on the field next to me. CPR for 5 minutes. I think all of us know CPR for 5 minutes is a pretty long time. And here Caleb and Zach, rotating, doing CPR on me while my wife's holding my head. Jeez, man. You never think that you're going to be in these moments. Like this is a movie scene. This is something that you see in a news article or a TV station, states away, you pray for them, be strong, but you never think it's going to happen to you. So I can remember fragments of this, going in and out of consciousness. And, sudden cardiac arrest is an electrical storm inside your body. It's different than a heart attack. So literally the electrical pulses were not reaching my heart in a way that keeps my heart beating in a normal rhythm. So I was going into VFib like this, and then I flatline, go back into VFib once I got hit by an AED. But I remember fragments like I remember waking up, coming to, seeing blades of grass. I can remember Caleb straddled on top of me doing CPR. I can remember hearing the engine of the Gator that's coming to pick me up because they can't fit an ambulance on the field. And I'm just like on low power mode, in and out, in and out. Hit by an AED 3 times on the field. I remember them putting me in the back of an ambulance, and I, for darn sure, remember receiving a cardiovert in the back of the ambulance, because that's a lot of joules, guys. I felt that one. But as my wife saw me get put in the back of an ambulance, she's aware enough. I wasn't responding at that time, and she's aware enough to know that, 5 minutes, you start to creep into lack of oxygen to the brain. So if I survive this, who am I going to be or what am I going to look like? Those are the thoughts that have to be going through her head. And I get to the hospital, and you can never be prepared for those type of emotions. And I was confused and angry about someone who is metabolically healthy. Like, as I am super conscious of what I put in my body, how I move my body. Like, that's just us as a family. Except one second I'm coaching my son, the other second I'm in the ICU getting a ventilator stuck down my throat. And now I'm being told that I've got to have an implanted device at 33 years old because I just had a sudden cardiac arrest. Like, what in the world is even a sudden cardiac arrest? How does that happen? Confused, angry, fearful. What happens next? Am I more susceptible to having these things? Is it a genetic mutation? I've got 3 kids and a pregnant wife. Like, what does that even look like? But leaving the hospital and getting home, and being hugged by my 3 kids at the front door, the only emotion I felt was gratitude. And that everybody deserves the same chance to survive that I had, period. Everyone deserves a chance to go home and be hugged by their loved ones. And the next 2 weeks was tough. Like, I wish I could say after that moment, like, I survived it, we're good. The next 2 weeks, that's when a lot of questions come in. That's the conversation that Rick was talking about. But that was given a chance for my kids to talk about what happened, but also, I'm a person who's tried to lead my life with faith the best I can. But I tell you what, man, when you go through something like that, it makes you ponder purpose. And if the national survivability for sudden cardiac arrest outside of a hospital is less than 10%, why am I one of the 10? And those questions are real. And I really didn't get clarity until I learned just how many people in this state, was praying for me. And then people reaching out with their stories. Similar stories to mine, where a loved one or themselves, cardiac arrest, courageous bystander, responds quickly, saves them, But the majority were not that, The majority were heartbreaking, of a child, of a spouse, a grandparent, sudden cardiac arrest, doesn't make it. And so that's where it was like, okay, dang, guys, I'm sorry. That's where I was like, all right, Jesus is talking to me. I'm here, and, I've done a lot of cool things in my life on a football field, but I think the greatest moment was like, what if all that had to happen for this to happen? As far as influence, and maybe I could share a platform. A week later, a middle-aged male playing pickleball, same place, sudden cardiac arrest. Did y'all hear about that? Doesn't make a headline. Doesn't make the news, So it's like, okay, this happens. It doesn't discriminate on age or gender. And I survived this thing for a reason. And I've got an obligation now, a responsibility, but also an opportunity, for a dad like me to go home to be hugged on by his wife and kids, So those emotions and those stories started Heart Huddle. And just real quickly, Heart Huddle is a nonprofit organization. It is organic and grassroots. We focus on getting AEDs into rec departments and emergency vehicles. We just put 5 in Simpsonville. A pretty cool thing? Gracely Park, where I was coaching, is attached to Simpsonville Fire Department with an AED. Guess which fields don't have an AED? the other 3 fields that we practice and play on the majority of the time, which now have AEDs. So that was our first mission. We're putting AEDs in 300 frontline vehicles in Colombia, police cars. So here's my ask. Not asking for your money. I'm asking for, give me a contact for your Parks and Rec director. And I want to know if they have AEDs in YMCAs on the fields. Oftentimes you'll learn that they've got them in the facilities, but they don't have them on the fields. That's why Heart Huddle exists. I'll close with this. The greatest compliment someone can give you after your long tenure, wherever you're at, or even in this room, if you can answer the question, did I leave this better than I found it? And the answer is a resounding yes. Man, that's a pretty cool testament, of just impacting and influencing people. So let's leave it better than we found it. Thank you, and God bless you.